So as you heard Jack mention at the start of the service today, this marks the first Sunday of what Christians historically and around the world call Advent, the beginning of the Christmas season. And this year we are going to spend our time with a series entitled Both and Christmas. And I'm going to explain what that means as we go forward in today's message. As it happens, the graphic up there is very revealing of the series' intent or purpose, and I'll explain that too as we go forward today. This is going to be a passage that you see quite a bit over the course of the next month during Advent 2016. This is how the Apostle Paul, starter of most of the churches after Jesus, writer of most of your New Testament, begins his letter to what would become one of the largest churches in the first century in southwestern Turkey, in the town of Ephesus. He says to them, God, in all of his wisdom and insight, was delighted to make known to us the mystery of his thinking and deepest desires through the person of Christ. In him we see God's plan for the completion of history, in which God will gather up all things through Christ, each and everything in both heaven and earth. There are some fundamental spiritual and also Christian beliefs that you see lined out here in this little snippet from the beginning of the letter of Ephesians. And these truths, as revealed here in Ephesians chapter 1, are going to be the truths that we camp out in for Advent 2016. First, and this should be no surprise, because we are talking about God after all, we need to go ahead and say that anytime any human being tries to speak about God or his truth or his wisdom or his plan or for his end game for the entire world and history, we're talking about something that in Paul's word is mysterious. This is a word that Paul actually has the notoriety in your Bible of using more than anybody else about God and who he is and sometimes how we interact with him. God is a quote-unquote mysterion in Greek, or a mystery. It's where our English word comes from. God can be very mysterious. And oddly, do you know who some of the people are who forget that very basic truth about God? It's the people who believe in him the most, or the people who talk about him the most, people like you and me. And I think it's because we talk about him week in and week out, and we work at believing in him week in and week out, and we try very hard to explain our belief in him to other people who may not week in and week out. In doing all of that, sometimes we forget that this spirituality thing, this God thing, is hard to wrap your head around. It is, in Paul's word, mysterious. But what he says in those verses is that according to the Christian faith, God's best shot at explaining himself to us or revealing the mystery of himself to us was in the person of Jesus. And that therefore also includes the baby Jesus of Christmas that we will celebrate during Advent. So in Christ you have, Paul says, the mystery of God, how he thinks, who he is, what his plans are for the world, revealed. But maybe admit with me, that doesn't remove all the mystery, because Jesus isn't altogether understandable either. It's not as if we have removed all the mystery about God because Jesus is thoroughly comprehensible. No, God's still to us, even those of us who believe in him and his Son, maybe most of all, remains a little slippery, a little hard to nail down, sometimes hard to just understand. This is where we want to spend our time this Advent season. I want to tell you where this series came from. So Pastor Chris at the branch and I we received the same daily devotional. It comes from a guy who's in Albuquerque who's been a tremendous spiritual influence on both of us. He's a Catholic priest who does a lot of work in teaching and social justice and things like that. And anyway, about 3 months ago, for a week or two, these daily devotionals were focused on the basic truth that so often spiritual truth or truth about God or the deepest truths about life and morality and right and wrong are mysterious. They're hard to figure out. They're hard to grasp. And one of our greatest errors as human beings, and yes, even Christians, is we try to remove all of that mystery. And so one of us, I can't even remember which one of us, emailed the other and said, this would make for a great Christmas series, even though the devotionals had nothing to do with Christmas. Whoever it was that emailed the other said, wouldn't it be great for a few Sundays if what we did was reintroduce to our people, who may have been Christians for decades, the beautiful, mysterious truth that we hold dear about Jesus during the Christmas season. So that's what I hope, and that's what he hopes to do for you and for the branch this Advent. We want you to see that believing that spiritual truth is kind of mysterious, kind of hard to nail down sometimes, seemingly beyond us or above us sometimes, is, here are the words, it's hard for us, but it's also good for us. And I hope over the course of this series you feel both of those things. I hope you feel challenged and maybe pulled out of the intellectual box that you've put God or Christianity or Christmas in. But in so doing, I hope you feel like that's a good thing, and it's an expansion of what you believe. That maybe it's a return of what was always necessary, which is the belief that spiritual truth and God himself will always be just a little mysterious to all of us. Here are some things about spiritual truth, mysterious spiritual truth, that are both hard and good for us as human beings. And as we progress through this series, we're going to talk about how this is specifically true about some of the things we believe about the Jesus of Christmas. The reason that believing that spiritual truth and God himself is at least a little mysterious to us is that we in the Western world, meaning America and Europe, we all tend to think that if something is true, then it's understandable. Now, what you may not know is that you didn't get to decide whether or not you think that about truth. You inherited it from the culture around you. And the culture around you in 2016 inherited it from Europe during the Renaissance. With the rise of science, this statement about truth became more and more a part of everyday life for people like you and me in the Western world. If it's true, then I can analyze it, I can do experiments on it, I can prove it to be true rationally. These are things that lots of people around you today believe. This is a bias or a presupposition that we have about truth. Here's someone famous from America's Revolution who will show you this pretty typical Western mindset in spades. This is what Thomas Paine said back in the 1700s. Mystery is the antagonist of truth. It is a fog of human invention that obscures the truth and represents it in distortion. There are a lot of people who think that. That if we talk in terms of morality or God or spiritual truth being at least a little mysterious, we're inventing that. And the more we think about it or the more we experiment on it, the more we use our logic to pull things apart and look at things in greater and greater depth, then the mystery will go away. Many people believe that around you and have for hundreds of years in America and Europe. Part of the problem that you and I face is we live in a world, we live in a culture where the amount of information we have grows exponentially every year. But that doesn't mean we understand things any better. Science, modern science, our understanding of the human brain and psychology and evolution and the start of the cosmos and the start of life, these things, they seem to be picking up speed in the amount of information that we have about them. However, do we really understand those things any better despite the fact that we have more information? This belief up here mistakes the difference between information and understanding. Now see, here's the truth biblically. When you think about spiritual mystery or God himself, truth of all kinds really can't be grasped 100% by your ability to reason it out. Some truths are better experienced than understood. Some truths have to be given to you. You can't figure them out on your own. Last week, for example, we finished our happiness series talking about the Beatitudes of Jesus in the beginning of Matthew chapter 5. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the gentle. Here's my wager, as I made to you last week. I don't think I can rationally explain to you. I can't reason out for you why it is that Jesus was right. That if you take him up on his wager and try to be a peacemaker, or try to be more merciful, or try to be more gentle, that in the end, one of the things you get is you're going to be more happy. I don't know that I can reason that out for you. However, as I told you last week, I have experienced it myself. And the more that I try to live that way and embody those principles and practice them toward the people around me, I may not understand it 100%, but I know what I've experienced and gained. And that's happiness. I can't explain to you why it is that love your neighbor is the way to live. And it's one of the two most important pieces you can put in place in your life. I don't think anyone can. But I do think the more you live that way and the more you experience it, the more your heart and your soul and your mind and your eyes are opened to the fullness of what life can be. And that's because some truths are better experienced or admired and appreciated than they can be understood. Some of the truths of Christmas work like that too. And what Paul said is, you just need to understand there are some truths that have to be given to you or revealed to you. You're not going to figure them out on your own. That is the genius of sending Jesus according to God's plan. There are lots of things about God we could not figure out on our own, and so we look to Jesus to understand who he is and what he cares about and what he's up to in the world. And without Jesus, we can't understand those things. So Paul says what God decided to do was send Jesus, who may not remove all the mystery, but at least gives you access to truths about God that you wouldn't have any other way, and you can't figure them out on your own. This is why talking about spiritual mystery and the fundamental fact that spirituality and God are at least a little mysterious is both good and hard for us. Then there's also this. Who wasn't taught in first grade or third grade that if 1 times 1 equals 1, then 1 times 1 cannot possibly ever equal 2? If you choose to paint something black, you are therefore choosing not to paint it white. And you and I live much of our lives thinking in these either-or pairs. If it is this, then it cannot be this. And however that is true about some of the simpler truths in life, it is not true about the more complicated or deeper truths of your life, and especially about God. You and I live in a country right now that is marked by simplistic either-or thinking, polarized thinking, where it's either this or it's that. When Congress chooses to obstruct and not work with the other party and simply say that our solution must be accepted 100%, or we will not work with the other party to come up with a compromise that's 80-20, 60-40. No, it's 100% or nothing. Therein is polarized thinking, simplistic either-or thinking. And we do it all the time. And of course, what you realize is, no, the more you get into the spiritual life, the more you understand about God, and the more you learn the Christian faith, in fact. You realize that so many of the deepest things, the most foundational things that we believe, they do not fall into simple either-or pairings. It is far more about the mystery of two things that blend together in a both and. And that's what Pastor Chris and I at the branch hope to do for you this year, is to show you a lot of the things you believe about Christmas, and a lot of things, frankly, we take for granted about the Christian message and the Christian Jesus, do not fall into simple either-or pairings. But they're in these blended both ands that are kind of above us and beyond us, and we can't reason them out. We can't reason them out. But they're beautiful to behold. One of the great scientists, physicists of the last century, a guy named Niels Bohr, writes, it's a little obscured on the screen, I apologize because of the reflection off the water. And he actually, in his field in physics, saw this play itself out over the course of the 20th century. He says, so often, the opposite of a simple truth is an opposite, but the opposite of a great truth is another truth. And that's exactly what you will begin to find with Christianity. Was Jesus, and the Christmas message specifically, was Jesus God? Was Jesus man? Well, we believe that the answer is he was both. And I can't explain that to you, and you can't explain that to me. Here, however, we begin to get beneath the surface of why it is that human beings struggle so much with the idea of spiritual truth or truth about God and morality and life being a little beyond us and a little mysterious. And it's because of the fundamental human flaw that we all have. Your problem and my problem, believe it or not, is not that we don't understand enough. No, our problem is our ego. Our problem is our want to control. Our problem is our want to be the center of the universe. When somebody says or believes, because very often they can't articulate it in words, but it's a belief that they carry around with them all the time, simply saying something like to themselves, if I can't reason this out for myself, then it cannot possibly be true. When they think that, they are effectively saying that their mind and their cognitive ability, their ability to reason things out or logic things out, is the final judge and jury in their life for what is true. And when they say that kind of thing, that is the statement of ego. Because the longer you live, whether or not you're a Christian, you figure out right quick, if you're willing, that there are lots of things in your life you can't figure out. There are lots of things in your life you can't control. And to think that you are the final arbiter for what is true is, in the end, proud. It is the statement of ego. And of course, I'm sure that you have heard friends, family, media personalities, scientists on the news sound like this. That if it's not reasonable to me, then it cannot possibly be true. And in that very moment when you hear that kind of thing, you are seeing the fatal flaw of every human being that's ever been born, the flaw of ego. And this is why speaking openly and honestly about spiritual truth being mysterious is so important. Because it shows you that, when I speak about the great truths of life and the great truths of God, and in this case, the great truths of Christmas within Christianity, it makes me humble. Because I realize that I can't quite comprehend all this. I realize that I can't quite explicate it all to you, and it makes me humble. I lose control, and I realize that I am a part of a world and I'm within God's story that really is not up to me. And I can choose whether or not to participate, I can choose whether or not to believe, but the truth is the truth, whether or not my ego decides it will agree with it or not. This is the great danger that all of us face. When we think that our own minds, or human reason in general, is the final arbiter of truth, we are speaking out of the great sin of the human race, ego. Instead, it's such a far better way to live to say, I believe in a God that is beyond me and not always comprehensible to me, but who has given to me Jesus to reveal himself to me. And now it is my choice whether or not I will believe in the truth therein. I don't have to decide, I don't even get to decide whether or not he's true. I just get to decide whether or not I buy in. This is how Gandhi said what you and I were just talking about. See if he doesn't hit the nail on the head. Truth without humility is nothing more than an arrogant caricature. And there are a great many people around you who live believing that they can figure the truth out on their own. And in so doing, there's very little humility in their understanding of truth. And all that is a projection of their mind, a delusion. In Gandhi's word, Gandhi's phrase, it's an arrogant caricature. Hopefully what Pastor Chris and I will do for you during Christmas is we're going to return to you the mystery of the truth of the Christmas message. We're going to let you see it and not quite understand it all, like he and I don't understand it all. And in so doing, we're going to give you humility too. And maybe we're going to get a little further away from that great ill of the human race, ego. One more thing that this does for us that's very important to mention. When we speak openly about spirituality and spiritual truth and God being at least a little mysterious and beyond us, it's both hard and good, and here's the last reason why. When you look at developmental psychology, which is how human beings over the course of their life and their life stages develop mentally, there is a stage of human development where we seek to make things very simple to understand. We seek either-or pairings. If you're a Lions fan, you can't be a Bears fan. If you're a Michigan fan, you can't be a Spartans fan. There's a place, like a predictable place in the development of every human being when the human brain just thinks that way naturally. You know when it is? It's when you're a preteen or an early teenager. And I'm sure all of you who are parents of kids who are that age or have been that age have seen that. Their thinking's a little more simplistic. It's not too sophisticated, can't handle too much nuance or complexity. They have to keep things real simple, controllable, understandable, etc., right? Well, here's the problem. Many adults don't ever advance beyond that. I used Congress as the example before, right? Of how it is that oftentimes in our particular culture we operate in hard and fast either-or choices. Well, let me go ahead and use another word about Congress. It's juvenile. It is developmentally juvenile for adults to behave that way. However, you and I know plenty of adults, maybe even we ourselves, sometimes choose to stay in this adolescent way of looking at the world, understanding truth, understanding morality, etc. At least admit that there's a part of you, there certainly is a part of me, who wishes sometimes that things were easier to figure out, that I could just lay it out in a pros and cons list, and somehow I would be able to see it more clearly or make the decision without any doubt. That's not how it works. Adulthood isn't that way. A human being, as they progress spiritually, as James Fowler found, should become more open to the concept of mystery. They should become more humble about the concept of God and spiritual truth as they develop, not less. The reason that so many Christians think, for instance, of being in their group and that other groups are wrong, or that their group is right and other groups are in error, is because they're teenagers. And their leaders have helped them think about Christianity and spirituality as teenagers because it's easier. And in a way, it's what we all hunger for. What Pastor Chris of the Branch and I want to do for you today is we want to help you continue to mature in the faith that you have. And we know that what part of that means for you and for us too is that we have to grow more comfortable with the idea of God and spiritual truth sometimes being mysterious and not so simple and not so easy to figure out. We need to restore them to that high place instead of doing what so often can be done, which is keep things too simple, too easy, too clear-cut, which basically means we all get to stay in puberty forever. Over the course of this series, I hope you feel like that part of you, that adult spirituality, expands and it grows. And herein, by the way, is the explanation of the graphic for the series. As we talk about some of the most basic spiritual truths about Christmas, about the Jesus of Christmas, and yes, about God himself, what you will find is that it's not just this truth that's true, and it's not just that truth that's true. It is not an either-or choice. It's both. And you only begin to grasp the truth of Christmas when you see both truths together, even if you might not be able to always figure them out. I want to finish with this quote. This comes from a professor of philosophy and apologetics at a Presbyterian seminary in Philadelphia. And he writes that so often, this is against how so often many of us think about mystery and spirituality and spiritual truth. He writes in his book, The Majesty of Mystery, quote, "A true and biblical view of mystery has its roots not in a lack of understanding, but in the teaching of Scripture itself." Maybe you, like me, have heard people say or assume that if you don't understand something about God, or you can't figure it out, or you don't quite understand how this particular part of the Bible makes sense, or what the Bible has to say makes sense, then really it's because you haven't worked hard enough to understand it. Yeah, we want to do away with that caricature in this series, because this guy's right. Actually, the longer you and I consider how mysterious God and truth and Christmas can be, the more we're going to find it's not a lack of understanding at all. It's actually deeply biblical and deeply scriptural. Would you pause with me and let's pray for the Advent season to come.